My father throws me into the sea to die, but before I drowns, something incredible happens. Amara, an 8-year-old girl, felt the weight of a bitter loneliness at home since Zuri, her stepmother, first walked through the door. The home that had once been a refuge for the child had turned into a battlefield. Amara, how many times do I have to tell you you're useless? Zuri's cutting voice echoed through the living room, always followed by a sneer of disdain. The little girl tried to hold back her tears, knowing that every sob would only increase the woman's anger. Kato, her father, was there, but he always seemed far away, absent in a cloud of confusion. He no longer protected her as he once did. Zuri, with cold eyes and harsh gestures, didn't hide her aversion. Every mistake, no matter how small, was a reason to hurt Amara with sharp words. Don't you get it, Kato? This girl is a burden. I don't know how you can stand her, Zuri said with contempt that only increased the tension in the house. Kato hesitated, fidgeted with his pockets, and avoided looking at Amara, as if pretending not to see would be enough to erase what was happening. The girl, on the other hand, only wanted to please them, to have her father see her as he did before Zuri. That night, Amara crept into the shadows of the staircase, not wanting to lose sight of the scene below. She knew something was about to happen. Zuri, sitting stiffly on the couch, delivered the ultimatum that Amara would never forget Kato. Either you get rid of her, or it's over. I can't keep living like this. The silence that followed those words weighed heavily in the air. Amara's heart beat so fast she feared Zuri would hear it. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but she stayed there, paralyzed, waiting for the answer that would change everything. Zuri, you can't be serious, Kaito murmured, his voice faltering. But he knew deep down that she was serious. Amara, wide-eyed, sensed the danger growing around her. She knew her father was about to be forced to make a choice. Zuri, impatient, abruptly stood up. It's me or that girl, Kato. Enough with the excuses. What should have been an impossible choice seemed to Zuri just a practical matter. Kato, already worn out and pressured, looked at the woman who now controlled his life and muttered something Amara didn't want or couldn't believe. I think you're right, he whispered, finally facing Zuri but avoiding his daughter's gaze. Zuri smiled, satisfied. Amara, however, felt her world crumble in that moment. Baba, her voice was almost a whisper, laden with a pain words couldn't describe. Kato didn't respond. The man who had once held her in his arms with so much love now slowly drifted away, sinking into his own despair. It will be better this way, Amara, he said without conviction, as if trying to convince himself more than her. Amara's small and fragile heart broke into pieces that would never be the same. Zuri, victorious, turned her back, now unconcerned, while Kato stood there, unsure of what to do with his own silence. Amara felt invisible. The girl who loved her father above all else was now nothing more than a nuisance, something to be discarded. Kato, with trembling hands, didn't dare look at her. The weight of his decision was a sentence. Go to your room, Amara, he finally said, his voice choked. Go. We'll figure this out tomorrow. With heavy steps, Amara climbed the stairs, holding back her tears. The danger she felt wasn't just the fear of Zuri but the growing emptiness between her and Kato. In that dark room, sitting on her bed, the girl heard for the last time the sound of a house that no longer belonged to her. The hours dragged on slowly, and Kato, consumed by guilt, could barely find rest. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Amara, scared and fragile, invaded his mind. Zuri slept beside him, at peace, as if the decision he had made was the simplest in the world. But inside Kato, a storm was brewing, dragging him to a dark place. The danger he felt didn't just come from Zuri's threats, but from the monstrosity he knew he was about to commit. There's no other way out, he repeated to himself, as if that could ease what was to come. The decision was made. The next morning, Kato tried to hide the heaviness in his expression, but Amara, with her watchful and sorrowful eyes, sensed that something was wrong. We're going for a ride tonight, Amara. Just the two of us, he said, forcing a smile that barely reached his lips. Amara, surprised, hesitated but agreed. It was rare for him to invite her for a moment alone, and deep down, A part of her still longed for the affection from before. "All right, Baba," she replied in a low voice. She wanted to believe that the invitation was a chance to reconnect with him. When the evening finally came, the sky was completely covered with clouds, and a cold breeze blew in the air. Cato helped Amara into the boat, and they set off. The water around them was like a black mirror reflecting the darkness of the sky. As he rowed, Cato felt the weight of each stroke as if he were sinking further into his own despair. Amara, sitting at the edge of the boat, began to feel a coldness in her chest, a premonition she couldn't ignore. "Baba, why are we going so far?" she asked, trying to hide the growing unease. Cato just mumbled something inaudible, avoiding his daughter's gaze. As they ventured farther into the sea, the tension between them grew. Cato's silence was suffocating, and Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. "Baba, it's getting really dark." "Can we go back?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but fear was already creeping in. Cato stopped rowing for a moment, his heart heavy. He knew this was the moment. The decision he had delayed as long as he could was before him, and there was no more running away. "Amara, he began, but his voice faltered. Cato's hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but to him, it felt like an eternity. Then, with an abrupt gesture, he stood up, his face distorted by guilt and despair. Amara, not understanding what was happening, stood up as well. "Baba." Her trembling voice broke the silence of the night. Cato looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. "Forgive me, Amara," he whispered, but the guilt had already consumed him. Before the girl could react, he grabbed her firmly by the arms. Amara began to struggle, panic taking hold of her. "Baba, what are you doing?" "Baba?" Her scream pierced the silent night, but Cato had already made his decision. With a quick movement, he lifted her and, in a desperate act, threw her over the side of the boat. Amara's body flew through the air for a brief second until the icy impact of the dark waters enveloped her. The shock was immediate. The girl was swallowed by the sea. And the cutting cold paralyzed her for a moment. Terror consumed her mind as her arms thrashed desperately against the waves, trying to stay afloat. "Baba." She screamed one more time, her voice now suffocated by the water filling her mouth, but the boat was already moving away. Cato, paralyzed, watched the scene with wide eyes. His hands trembled as he slowly rowed away from the point where Amara was struggling against the waves. The sound of her screams echoed in his mind, and the weight of guilt crushed him. "What have I done?" he murmured to himself, as if waking from a nightmare he couldn't escape. Silent tears streamed down his face as he rowed farther away, too afraid to look back. The danger he had feared, the risk of losing Zuri, now seemed insignificant compared to the destruction he had caused. Amara, in a panic, felt the weight of the water pulling her down more and more. Her arms fought desperately, but the cold and fear weakened her with each passing second. She tried to scream, but her voice was lost in the tumultuous sea. Her father's face was still etched in her mind, and she couldn't understand why he had done it. "Baba, please," was her last cry before being swallowed again by the waters, and then everything around her turned to darkness. The darkness seemed to swallow everything. Amara, exhausted and almost out of strength, felt her body sinking more with each passing second. The cold of the sea was relentless, and her once nimble hands were now numb. Her lungs burned and the girl fought against the waves, but despair began to give way to resignation. Deep down, she believed this would be her end. Her thoughts swirled around a single question. Why did he do this? But as Amara floated between life and death, a distant light appeared through the fog. A small fishing boat was approaching from afar, and her savior was drawing near without even knowing the tragedy he was about to interrupt. Kwaku, a simple fisherman with a quiet life, was returning from a long day at sea. The nets were empty, and he sighed, already thinking about how he would explain to his wife that, once again, the work hadn't yielded much. Then, something unusual caught his attention on the horizon. Near the choppy waves, he saw something moving. "What's that?" he muttered to himself, furrowing his brow. He stood up in the small boat and tried to see better. His heart leaped when he realized it was a child, desperately trying to stay afloat. Without wasting a second, Kwaku rowed with all the strength he had, cutting through the waves as if his life depended on it. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. Amara, now barely conscious, hardly heard what was happening. When the boat came close, Kwaku leaned over as far as he could, stretching his arms until he reached her. With a firm but careful pull, he lifted her into the boat. Amara's body was cold, and her breathing was shallow, as if she were on the verge of giving up. "My God," Kwaku murmured, wrapping her in an old blanket he had in the boat. "You'll be okay. You'll be okay," he repeated, more to reassure himself than the girl. As he wrapped her in the blanket, Kwaku noticed the paleness on the child's face. His heart tightened. "What happened to you, little one?" he asked softly, not expecting an answer. Amara, still frightened and weak, just trembled, her eyes fixed on the horizon, unable to speak. Kwaku, seeing the terror that still hung over her, knew he had to act fast. He rowed back with all the speed he could muster, the boat rocking with the frantic movement of the waves. "Just a little more. We're almost there," he said, trying to calm her. As the boat made its way back to shore, Amara began to regain consciousness. She was still in shock, but the warmth of the blanket and Kwaku's soothing tone made her feel, for a brief moment, safe. She looked at the man, her large eyes full of fear, as if trying to understand what had happened. Kwaku, noticing her gaze, smiled gently. "You're safe now, little one," he said. Amara, too weak to respond, just nodded slightly, feeling for the first time that maybe, against all odds, her life had been saved. Finally, the boat reached the shore. Kwaku, now calmer, carried Amara in his arms, careful not to frighten her any further. "Let's get you home, girl. You're safe now," he said, as he walked to his small cabin in the village. Each step was taken with care, as if the whole world was broken around them. But at that moment, Kwaku knew something much bigger was happening. Amara had been rescued, but the danger she had faced, both in the sea and in her life before being thrown into those waters, was still a mystery to him. Kwaku's house was simple, made of weathered wood, but there was something cozy about the small refuge at the edge of the village. When he entered carrying Amara in his arms, the warmth of the fireplace immediately enveloped the girl like a hug she hadn't felt in a long time. Kwaku carefully placed her in a chair near the fire, his eyes full of compassion. "Stay here. I'll get something warm for you," he said with a gentle voice, trying to bring comfort to the still shaken girl. Amara, for her part, still trembled, and the trauma of the previous night remained imprinted in every part of her fragile body, while Kwaku prepared some hot tea. He glanced at Amara with concern. The girl was curled up, her large eyes fixed on the fire, but her mind seemed far away. "She's so scared. What happened to this poor child?" Kwaku thought with a heavy heart. Every small movement Amara made was a reflection of the deep pain she carried, a burden too heavy for someone so young. As he approached with a cup in hand, he knelt beside the chair and held it out to her. "Here, drink a little. It'll warm you up," he said with a gentle smile. Amara took the cup with trembling hands, feeling the warmth radiating from it. The silence between them was thick, but there was no rush. Kwaku knew she needed time, needed to feel safe again, and that's exactly what he offered: time and patience. Gradually, as the warmth of the fire and the drink spread through Amara's body, she began to relax. There was still fear in her eyes, but now there was also a small glimmer of hope, something Kwaku couldn't help but notice. "You're safe here," he repeated, as if those words were the medicine she so desperately needed. In the days that followed, Kwaku and Amara built a silent but comforting routine. He never asked questions, respected the girl's time, who was still fragile both physically and emotionally. He took her fishing in calmer waters, teaching her to watch the sea without fear. And though Amara's gaze sometimes got lost in the waves as if searching for answers the sea couldn't give, she began to feel stronger, more present. Slowly, that simple place, the village in Kwaku's cabin, turned into something she hadn't felt in a long time: a home. Kwaku also felt something change within himself. Since losing his own daughter years ago, he had closed his heart to the world, but Amara, somehow, was awakening something in him. When he saw her playing with the little things around the house, seashells, pieces of driftwood brought in by the tide. A smile involuntarily crossed his face. He knew she was still hurt, that the emotional danger she carried was immense, but he was determined to help her find her way back. This girl is strong, he thought, admiring the way she tried day by day to pick herself up. The village, with its slow pace and friendly people, also began to embrace Amara. The market ladies always gave her candy when she passed by with Kwaku, and the fishermen waved to her kindly. For Amara, it was a completely new world. Unlike Kato and Zuri's house, where the atmosphere was suffocating and hostile, here, people seemed to genuinely care, and although the trauma was still present, she began to feel that perhaps it was possible to trust again, to smile again. Kwaku watched her closely with silent pride, knowing she still had a long way to go, but that the first step had already been taken. In that simple and welcoming refuge, Amara began to rebuild her strength. She still woke up at night sometimes, scared, dreaming of the moment she was thrown into the sea. But now there was something that hadn't existed before: a safe harbor. Kwaku, with his kindness and patience, offered more than just shelter. He offered the chance to heal. As the days passed, the bond between Kwaku and Amara grew closer. The silences that were once filled with the weight of Amara's trauma began to be softened by small conversations. Kwaku was always careful, never forcing anything, just waiting for the girl to feel comfortable speaking. On a cloudy day, as the gentle sound of the sea filled the air, Kwaku found her sitting on the porch of the small house, staring at the horizon. It was a scene he knew all too well. "Amara, you seem distant," he said in his calm voice. The girl looked at him, her large eyes reflecting something deeper than simple sadness. Kwaku sat beside her, saying nothing for a moment. He knew it was time to share his own pain, something he had kept hidden for a long time, as if silence about the past could protect him from the truth. "You know, Amara, you remind me a lot of someone," he began, his voice tinged with a soft melancholy. Amara, curious, watched him, waiting for him to continue. Kwaku took a deep breath before going on. "I had a daughter many years ago. She was your age when I lost her." His voice faltered for a moment, and he looked out at the sea, as if the waves could ease the pain he was about to expose. "She loved the sea, too," he continued with a sad smile on his lips. "It was our special place. We always went fishing together or just sat and listened to the sound of the waves, like you're doing now." Kwaku paused for a moment, his gaze lost on the horizon. Amara stayed silent, sensing the weight of that memory. But one day there was a storm. I wasn't paying attention. The pain in his voice deepened, and he needed a moment to regain control. "She was taken by the waters, just like you were. I tried to save her but couldn't in time." Amara stared at Kwaku, feeling the gravity of the revelation. For the first time, she realized that the man who had been her rock also carried a deep wound. "And since then, I've carried that weight, Amara, the pain of not being able to save her, of having failed as a father." Kwaku finally looked at the girl, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "When I found you that night, it was as if God was giving me a second chance, as if I could somehow fix what I couldn't do before." Kwaku's words hit Amara in a way she didn't expect. For the first time, she understood the depth of the kindness he had shown her since the rescue. He wasn't just taking care of her, he was healing through her. Amara, who had kept so much inside until then, felt an even stronger connection to the man who had saved her. I'm sorry about your daughter, Kwaku," she said in a low voice, finally breaking the silence. The words were few, but they carried a sincerity Kwaku hadn't expected. He smiled, a sad but grateful smile. "Thank you, Amara," he replied, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "But you know, you've helped me see something I hadn't before. I can't change what happened to my daughter, but I can take care of you now, and that gives me hope." Amara, touched by Kwaku's words, felt a wave of emotion wash over her. For the first time since being thrown into the sea, she felt that perhaps she could let go of some of the pain she carried. Kwaku's story, his own loss, now intertwined with hers. They were no longer alone in their pain. The weight of the past was still there, but the bond forming between them brought a kind of quiet healing. Both carried deep scars, but together they were finding a way to move forward. Amara said nothing more. Just nestled beside Kwaku, gazing out at the same sea that had taken so much but now, in a way, had given them both a second chance. The peace Amara had begun to find in the village was abruptly interrupted on a day she would never forget. Kwaku was out fishing, and Amara was walking through the small square when suddenly a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Her heart stopped for a moment. Kato. He was there, visibly worn, unshaven, and with an empty look as if the world had collapsed on him. Amara stood frozen, a whirlwind of emotions washing over her: fear, anger, and above all, the memory of the night he threw her into the sea. How dare he show up here after everything he had done? Kato, for his part, was desperate. After being kicked out of the house by Zuri, who had betrayed him without remorse, he found himself alone, aimless, and without a family. Guilt consumed him every moment, and the only thing he could think about was Amara. The weight of what he had done was destroying him, and now, standing before her, Kato seemed a shadow of the man he once was. His eyes searched hers, trying unsuccessfully to find a spark of understanding. "Amara," he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. But she took a step back, her face marked by the pain and fear that this unexpected encounter stirred up. "No," Amara shouted, her voice echoing through the village. The fear that he had come back to finish what he started in the sea consumed her. She quickly turned and began running, not daring to look back. Kato tried to follow her, but his steps were hesitant, as if the weight of his guilt was an invisible anchor. "Please, Amara, listen to me," he begged, his voice breaking with despair. But the words seemed to have no effect. To Amara, his presence was a threat, a danger she thought she had left behind but was now returning to haunt her. Kwaku, returning from the fishing trip, saw the scene from a distance. His immediate instinct was to protect Amara. He found her crying, trembling, hiding behind one of the cabins. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Amara, with tear-filled eyes, could only manage to say one word: Kato. Hearing the name, Kwaku felt a tightness in his chest. He knew who Kato was, knew the tragic story of that family, and now here he was, the man who had thrown his daughter into the sea, asking for forgiveness. Kwaku held Amara by the shoulders, and with the softest voice he could muster, said, "You're safe. I'm here." As Amara stayed with Kwaku, Kato approached, hesitant but determined. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to face the hatred he would likely receive. When Kwaku finally faced him, his eyes were as hard as stone. "What do you want here, Kato?" Kwaku asked with a firmness that made Kato hesitate for a moment. "I came for Amara," Kato replied, his voice faltering. He looked at Kwaku and then at his daughter, who was hiding behind the fisherman, her eyes full of fear. "I know I was wrong. I know I don't deserve anything from her, but please, I need her forgiveness." The tension was palpable. Kwaku watched Kato carefully, not moving a muscle, as if analyzing every word, every movement. Amara, still shaken, felt her heart racing in her chest. The mere thought of being near her father again terrified her. This was the man who should have protected her. But he had thrown her into the dark waters, trying to rid himself of her as if she were a burden. "I can't forgive you," Amara said, her voice trembling but firm. Her words cut through the air, and Kato's face contorted with pain. "I understand," he murmured, lowering his eyes. Kwaku took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, even though his instinct was to keep Kato as far away from Amara as possible. But something in Kato's broken look made Kwaku hesitate. He didn't see a cruel man standing before him, but rather someone destroyed by his own mistake. "Amara, you don't have to do anything you don't want to," Kwaku said, not taking his eyes off Kato. "But sometimes forgiveness is the only way to move forward." Kwaku's words hung in the air, hitting both Kato and Amara. The young girl stayed silent, trying to understand what she felt in that moment while her father stood there, waiting for an answer that might never come. Amara felt a tight knot in her chest. Kato's presence stirred conflicting feelings in her that she didn't yet know how to deal with. Fear and anger still dominated, but the image of her father, broken and begging for forgiveness, touched something she couldn't understand. "He abandoned me," Threw me into the sea as if I were nothing, she repeated to herself, trying to fuel the hatred she felt. But there was something more, something she didn't want to admit, a remnant of the man who, before Zuri, was her hero. That man seemed to have disappeared, but now, standing before her, perhaps he was trying to reappear. Why did he do this, Kwaku? How could he throw me into the sea? Amara asked in a low voice, feeling the tears stream down her face. Kwaku, who was by her side, sighed deeply before answering. Sometimes people make terrible choices, Amara. They get lost, and in their desperation, they make mistakes they regret for the rest of their lives, he said, his voice calm and reflective. Your father seems to be trying to fix what he did. But forgiveness, that's up to you. Amara looked at him, confused. How could she forgive someone who nearly destroyed her? Looking at Kato, who stood at a distance, defeated and waiting for an answer, Amara felt the weight of everything on her shoulders. Forgiveness seemed impossible at that moment, and the pain was still deep. I can't, Kwaku. I just can't, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Kwaku, with his characteristic patience, observed her in silence for a moment and then, with a gentle look, decided to share something that might help Amara. I never had the chance to ask my daughter for forgiveness. She was gone before I could. I never had that opportunity, and I've carried that regret with me all these years. Those words cut through the silence and made Amara stop for a moment. Kwaku had always been her rock, someone she trusted and felt safe with. Knowing that he carried such a deep pain changed something inside her. Sometimes forgiveness isn't for the other person but for ourselves, he continued, now looking directly into her eyes. Forgiving can be the first step to letting go of this weight, to freeing yourself from the pain you carry. Kwaku's words were soft, but they carried a truth she couldn't ignore. Amara looked at her father again. He seemed so fragile, so regretful, but still, the pain of almost being drowned by him was impossible to erase. The dilemma loomed large in her chest. I don't know, Kwaku. I don't know if I can, she murmured, feeling the conflict grow within her. She remembered the childhood before Zuri when Kato was her protector, someone who was always by her side. But she also couldn't shake the memory of that night on the boat when the man who should have loved her had thrown her into mortal danger. Kwaku knew the decision wouldn't be easy. He knelt beside her, gently placing his hand on the girl's shoulder. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what happened, Amara, and it doesn't mean that what he did was right. But it can mean that you're choosing to move forward, that you're choosing not to let what he did control who you'll be from now on, he explained. Kwaku's words were kind, and Amara felt the truth in them. But at the same time, the fear of forgiving and getting hurt again was like an invisible wall she couldn't climb. Kato, who had been listening from a distance, remained still, struggling with his own despair. He knew he didn't deserve his daughter's forgiveness. But the thought of living the rest of his life without the chance to redeem himself was unbearable. I'll wait as long as it takes, Amara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just want you to know that if I could go back, I'd do anything to fix what I did. I was wrong, and I understand if you never forgive me, but I'm here, willing to do whatever it takes. The weight of the moment was overwhelming for Amara. The anger she felt was there, but the fear of losing the chance to move forward, to perhaps reconnect with her father, also tormented her. Kwaku's words echoed in her mind. Forgiveness, she knew, was a difficult choice, perhaps the hardest she had ever faced. But in that moment, she began to realize that forgiveness wasn't just about Kato, it was about her emotional freedom, about her own healing. Amara spent the night awake, her thoughts spinning in her mind like a never-ending storm. The dilemma was overwhelming, and the weight of deciding whether to forgive her father seemed greater than anything she had ever faced. As the moonlight streamed through the small window of her room, she remembered every moment from her childhood with Kato to the terrible night he threw her into the sea. How can I forgive him for that? She asked herself, feeling her heart tighten once more. And yet, Kwaku's words also echoed. Forgiveness could free her, but she was afraid of what that would mean. The next morning, with tired eyes, Amara decided she needed a moment alone. She walked to the beach, where the waves gently lapped at the shore. There, sitting before the vast ocean, She felt the cool sea breeze touch her face, the same sea that had almost taken her, but also the sea that now gave her strength to think. I could hate him forever, she whispered to herself, but what would that do to me? The question weighed heavily on her chest. Amara knew that keeping that pain alive inside her could destroy everything she was beginning to build, including the peace Kwaku had given her. The memories kept flowing. She remembered the loving father Kato had been, how he used to hold her in his arms and sing her to sleep. They were memories that had been buried under anger but were now beginning to resurface. She knew that before Zuri, Kato was a different man, someone she loved deeply. Yet, what he had done still hurt her. The danger of trusting him again terrified her. If I forgive him, how can I be sure he won't hurt me again? She thought, feeling the conflict grow inside her. The decision wouldn't come easily, but as the hours passed, Amara began to realize that perhaps forgiveness was less about Kato and more about her. If I don't forgive him, I'll be holding on to this pain forever, she reflected, watching the waves, which now seemed calm. And if I forgive him, maybe I can start over. Kwaku was right. Forgiving wouldn't erase what had happened, but it could be the first step toward freeing her heart from that crushing weight. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was also part of the healing she had been searching for. By late afternoon, Amara returned to Kwaku's house, with her heart a little lighter, but still uncertain about how to handle the inevitable encounter that was coming. Kato was waiting, sitting on the edge of the beach, his gaze fixed on the sea, as if searching for some kind of answer in the waters that haunted him so much. When Amara approached, he slowly lifted his head, his face marked by guilt and regret said more than any words. She stopped for a moment, watching him. The man before her was no longer the same one who had thrown her into the sea, and though the pain was alive, something inside her began to change. "Baba," she said, her voice coming out softer than she expected. Kato looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't know what to expect from this conversation, but the fact that Amara had approached him gave him a small glimmer of hope. "Amara," he began, but was interrupted by his own emotion. He took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to fix what I did. I can't erase what happened, but I'm here, willing to try if you'll give me that chance." Amara listened to him in silence, feeling the confusion inside her, but also the desire to ease the weight she had been carrying. For a long moment, Amara stayed silent, letting Kato's words resonate within her. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that the decision to forgive wouldn't erase the pain of the past, but perhaps it was the only way to move forward. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she spoke. "I forgive you, Baba," she said, her voice choked, "but not for you. For me." Kato, in disbelief, felt the tears stream down his face. The gratitude was immense, but he knew there was still much to do to earn it. "Thank you, Amara," was all he could manage to say, his voice full of emotion. Amara knew that forgiveness was only the beginning of a long journey. The pain and distrust wouldn't disappear overnight, but she felt that something had changed within her. By taking that step, she wasn't just forgiving Kato, she was freeing herself from the emotional prison the trauma had created. "Maybe I can move on now," she thought as she felt a strange peace begin to settle in her heart. Kato, for his part, knew he would have to earn his daughter's trust again, but that first act of forgiveness was the greatest gift he could receive. The village seemed more peaceful than ever, the calm rhythm of the waves lapping the shore, the distant sounds of fishermen at work, and the gentle breeze blowing through the windows of Kwaku's small house. Life, once marked by fear and pain, was now beginning to transform into something new and unexpected. Kato, who had decided to stay in the village, worked side by side with Kwaku in the fishing trade. The relationship between the two, which had started with tension and distrust, slowly evolved into a quiet camaraderie, supported by their shared determination to give Amara a new life. For Amara, the days were no longer filled with fear. She still carried the scars of the past, but now those scars were part of a story that made her stronger. Kwaku and Kato, who had once seemed like distant figures in her heart, now formed a circle of protection around her. There were days when the weight of what had happened still pressed on her chest, but little by little, she found peace in the small things. The village, with its sandy streets and the constant smell of the sea, was becoming the home she never thought she'd have. Kato, for his part, was determined to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. He knew that Amara's forgiveness didn't mean everything was resolved, but it meant he had a new opportunity. Every day he thought as he cast the nets into the sea, "I'll prove to her that I'm a different man." Kwaku, watching Kato's efforts closely, felt a mixture of admiration and relief. The man who had once destroyed Amara was now willing to do anything to see her healed. Kwaku would never be a substitute for Amara's father, but the bond between them was something special, a friendship born from pain but now blossoming in trust. The nights in Kwaku's small house were filled with simple, warm conversations. Kato and Kwaku shared fishing stories while Amara watched them with a small smile on her face. The feeling of normalcy, something she had forgotten how it felt, was slowly returning. Kato, once so broken by guilt, now laughed timidly during their talks. He was still a man in reconstruction, but he was willing to dedicate himself to the new family he was forming. "I never thought I could have this again," Kato confided to Kwaku one night, looking out at the sea. "You gave me a second chance, Kwaku. I'll never forget that." Kwaku just shook his head, smiling. "Amara gave you that chance, Kato. I was just the bridge," he said, watching the girl who was laughing in the distance, playing with seashells on the sand. For Kwaku, Amara was the true symbol of redemption. She, who had faced the worst, was now the bond that held that small family together. Kwaku felt that by taking care of Amara, he had also healed part of himself. The pain he carried from the loss of his own daughter was easing. The village, once just a temporary refuge, now became a permanent home for all of them. The village also welcomed them warmly. The neighbors, who knew the stories of Kwaku and Amara, watched with sympathy as the new family formed. People greeted Amara as she passed, offering her sweets or a kind smile. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she belonged somewhere. She was no longer the girl lost in a storm of pain. Now, with Kwaku and Kato by her side, she felt safe. A cycle of suffering had been broken, and in its place, a new cycle of love and forgiveness was beginning to emerge. The final piece of that emotional puzzle had fallen into place. The new family that Amara, Kato, and Kwaku had formed wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on forgiveness, on the resilience of each of them, and on the desire to move forward. In that seaside village, where the gentle waves marked time in a constant rhythm, they finally found the peace they had long sought. The journey of pain and redemption didn't end there, but it was there that a new beginning took root. The simplicity of life in the village was, in the end, what offered the happiness they had long been denied. Amara, Kwaku, and Kato's journey shows us how forgiveness can be a difficult but essential path to moving forward. By deciding to forgive, Amara not only made space to heal her own wounds, but also gave her father a new chance to rebuild the bond between them. Kwaku, with his kindness, teaches us the power of empathy, and Kato shows us the weight of regret, but also the strength to seek redemption. The lingering question is, does forgiveness free us? Or in some situations, is it impossible? This story unfolds a profound journey of forgiveness, redemption, and healing. Amara's courage in forgiving her father, despite the unspeakable pain he caused, reflects the difficult yet powerful choice to let go of resentment for personal peace. Kwaku's kindness and empathy serve as a reminder that, even when people are burdened by their own past, their compassion can help others heal. Through Amara's strength, Kato's remorse, and Kwaku's gentle support, we witness how true forgiveness can be a path to rebuilding relationships and finding new beginnings in the midst of brokenness. Let this story inspire us to think about forgiveness in our own lives. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is to let go of the pain others have caused, yet in that choice we might find our own freedom and peace. Please share your reflections in the comments, like this video if it moved you, and subscribe to join us in exploring more stories that reveal the depth of human experience. Turn on notifications to stay connected to stories that make us reflect, heal, and grow. Ya Allah, soften our hearts to forgive those who have wronged us and grant us the strength to seek forgiveness for our own mistakes. Bless those who strive to change for the better and provide comfort to those in pain. Let us be beacons of mercy and compassion, and protect us from actions that bring harm to ourselves or others. Ameen.